Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Are shows like Bridgerton and Game of Thrones, or romance novels, or fun books that also have some PG-13 or maybe even R-rated scenes, are they okay for Catholic women to be reading, watching, and consuming? We're going to get into that question in this week's episode. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I'm a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy. And I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. Joining me today is my semi-regular co-host, Kathleen Chavanis.
All right. This is going to be a fun thing to talk about.
It's a little spicy.
A little spicy. So we're talking about romance novels. We're talking about media, like things like Bridgerton, Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. Is it Outlander? Is that the name of it?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I haven't. I knew that one was like a little bit, but I didn't know how intense that was. Outlander. I don't know if anyone remembers anything on HBO, basically.
Yeah, pretty much anything on HBO.
There was that show Rome, like, I don't know, maybe like 15 years ago on HBO, which, wow, I'm like dating myself. But my husband and my sister-in-law like really like liked it. And I watched a few episodes and I was like, oh no, I cannot do this one.
Yeah.
But it was like similar.
Let's talk really quick about the problem, and then we'll talk about why it's so hard not to watch these things or not to read these things. So, all right. So here's the problem is, and this is very, very common, that Catholic women will read romance novels or watch shows like that are not explicitly pornography to help them get in the mood. Mm-hmm. And like, it feels fine. It feels fine if you're like reading a book and then you're like feeling aroused a little bit, and then have sex with your husband, and like it was fun and happy, and your husband was excited because you were like aroused, and like it feels like a good thing. It feels fine. But and this is where I think this is going to be kind of a call to action for anyone listening here, is this, it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate to be reading stories about other people having sex, like other people's sex stories, even if it's like one of those books that's super fun and has one sex scene in it. Mm-hmm. And even if we're like, oh, I just skipped those couple of pages. Like, even if that is the case, these things alter your brain chemistry without you even knowing it.
Yeah.
Even if you're like, oh, I'll just like skip over a couple of pages. Like, sex was designed for husband and wife only. And at any point when we are like exposed to or like enter into a story of other people having sex, our brain chemistry is altered. The integrity of the act is altered. Like, it's just not what sex was designed to be. And we need to guard our hearts and minds from those kinds of things. Like, this is the problem, because it feels fine. Mm-hmm. But it's like, it is really affecting us, and it's affecting our marriages.
Yeah.
And here's why it's so hard, is because shows like Bridgerton are probably, I don't know, I watched roughly a minute, 2 minutes. I don't know how much I watched. I watched until we got to the first sex scene, and I was like, oh, this wasn't what I thought the show was going to be. I thought this was going to be like Pride and Prejudice. And so I was like, okay, this is not the show for me.
I think I got past you. I got like 2 episodes in, or 3 maybe. And then I was just like, oh no, okay. There's a lot of this, which I should have known, given the fact that there was one within like the first 2 minutes of the first episode.
There have been so many movies where that happens to me. I'll be like, oh, people have talked about this movie. It was so fun. And like within the first minute or two, there's like this sex scene. And I'm like, I can't get through this. Like Wolf of Wall Street has one. Bridesmaids has one. Like first 5 minutes of the movie sex scene. Like I'm not even talking about one like tucked in toward the end. Like, oh, it's actually kind of helpful when you have that in a movie because you're like, oh, okay, that's not the media for me. Shut it down.
Right. Well, I think that the point you make about these things altering our brain chemistry without even knowing it is a really good one, because it's almost like the same problem. And we talk about, now, I don't know, I have kids who love video games, right? So maybe, people with younger kids can't quite relate to this yet, but we talk about kids with video games, right? And having to like really control like what video games they're playing, like are they allowed online? There's like all these things with video games. And part of it is like the graphics of these games have become so realistic. Yeah. Right? That they are actually like they're desensitizing our children to the reality of this kind of violence. And there are studies that have been done that prove this, that children have been desensitized to violence because of these graphic video games, right? So in the same way, like they don't know what's happening. They don't see or feel or understand that their brains are really changing under this influence, right? And it's the same thing with us. Like we just watch these things and we are becoming desensitized. And here's the big problem, right? We know this is essentially softcore porn. Like it is. And we know the problem with pornography.
Like that's part of the reason why we wanted to do this episode is we need to, as Catholic women, call this out. Romance novels are softcore porn. It is not appropriate to be reading romance novels as a Catholic woman. It's not. Shows like Bridgerton, Outlander, Game of Thrones, any show that has a sex scene in it is softcore porn or edging into hardcore porn.
Some of them, right? Like 50 Shades, right? But I mean, which again, I honestly have no idea what's actually in
I don't even know. I don't know what's in 50 Shades of Grey.
I have not read. I have not watched. I have not done any. I just can't handle it.
Just know it exists.
But here's the thing. We know that with pornography, right? We know it alters our brain chemistry, number one. Number two, we know that intimacy becomes more difficult after being exposed to porn, right? Yeah. Because because of how everything has been altered. If you are a woman who is already struggling to get in the mood, who's already struggling with lower libido, and you feel like one of the only ways you can get into it is by watching one of these shows or reading some of these books, you are not helping yourself in the long run, right? You are continuing to alter that brain chemistry, to desensitize yourself to the reality of your personal sex life, right? Like that's, and which is going to make it even harder to kind of stop using those things and then feel like you have a fulfilling sex life.
Yeah.
The focus here needs not to be what can I do to arouse myself? What can I do to make this better or easier or whatever? What needs to happen is a personal one-on-one working with your husband, right? To say, how can we make this better together? What do I need to do? Like that needs to be the goal if you're really going to actually get out of a rut that you might feel like you're in. Because again, going to these other avenues, you're just going to make it harder in the long run.
And the thing is, like, there are ways to get yourself in the mood that are perfectly morally permissible. Mm-hmm. It does not ever involve thinking about, reading about, looking at someone else having sex.
Yes.
It never will involve that.
Yeah.
What it can involve is thinking about having sex with your husband. That is perfectly morally appropriate, especially when you are like anticipating having sex, like let's say, you know, in a couple hours, you guys plan to have sex, like have that on your mind. Help yourself get in the mood by thinking about how much fun it's going to be to have sex with your husband.
Yeah.
Think about like a fun time that you had maybe a couple times ago, or something fun that he did, or think about something that you want to try.
Think about how you can set your space up, right? Start setting your space up, set that up, you know, just what are you going to put on? What are you going to wear? What do you like about the way it looks? What do you like about the way it feels, right? Like, yeah, all of these are things. And I will say that I have been really diving into this idea in the last like few weeks of the imagination, and just how the imagination is really, truly such a gift, particularly in regards to prayer. So there's this great book on prayer that I was sharing with Ellen, and it was funny because we probably talked about it already, but
We have.
yeah. But anyway, Father Boniface Hicks has this great book with Father Thomas Acklin or something. But anyway, it's called Personal Prayer, and it's just so phenomenal. And I'm like loving it. Anyway, so much. I sent it to Ellen because it's just hysterical. It's like, wow, I'm like reading this first chapter and just, you know, so easy to just sub out prayer for sex. Anyway, but they talk about what I've got, the biggest thing I've gotten from this book thus far is this idea of the imagination. And the imagination, you know, we use it all the time for a lot of the times, a lot of not great things, right? I mean, our anxiety thrives off of our imagination, right? Like it's so easy. Like we have it and we use it, but we use it in ways that are just not always beneficial to us. When, my goodness, how your prayer life could be revolutionized by utilizing your imagination is just insane. Like, it's blown my mind. And I've really been trying to like dive into using my imagination more to essentially help me grow in holiness, right? To better my prayer life, to better your marriage, right? Like you can do that. Like, it's not like, you know, we're not so stuck up and, you know, like we're not so prudish as Catholics. In fact, Catholics are like, they should not be prude in any way, shape, or form.
Well, we should be like, prudent. We shouldn't be prudish.
Prudent, not prudish. Yes. Love that. But, you know, it's not like we're saying you can't sit there and think about sex. You can't sit there. Like, that is not the case. It's actually so far from the truth. You just can't think about it in another relationship, right?
Yeah.
Right. Which I think, I mean, let's like, again, to make the connection to actual pornography, right? Like, we don't want our husbands getting aroused by watching other people have sex, right? In true pornography. Why would it be okay for you to become aroused by watching other people have sex in what or
reading
it in any sort of even softcore porn manner? It's just not okay. You know, but sit and think about your husband. Think about like the way he touches you. Think about the things that
about
really,
his body.
really feel good.
Like his body is good.
Yeah. Like think about all of those things, and that's great, and that's holy, and that's wonderful, right? But use that imagination 1,000%. But just use it towards aim it towards your husband. Aim it towards your husband. That's all.
Yeah. Well, and like, okay, why romance novels? You know, why are romance novels such a problem?
Yeah.
Because women, our brain, our imagination is like in a lot of ways stronger than men's imagination. Our brain functions differently, where the eyes play a very, very strong role in the male brain chemistry. Like the women, we don't need that like external stimuli from the eyes to produce the same results in our brain. So like this is why pornography is typically more of a problem. Like visual pornography is more of a problem with males because their eyes actually, like the way that their brain functions, what comes in through their eyes, they are visual. They are much more visual beings. Like literally, it's not just like one of those little phrases that we say like men are visual and women are something else. Like actually the way that the male brain works, the eyes provide a higher percentage of the like data that the brain takes in than women.
Yeah. Yeah.
For women, like it's just our imagination And so reading romance novels or reading like a book that just has a romance scene in it. Like our brain is so good at that, and it is so easy to become all tingly from reading one quick page.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe we're not even reading the sex scene part of it. We're reading the lead up to the sex scene part of it. And that's getting us tingly. That's still a problem.
Yeah.
And I can, like, I'm speaking from personal experience here. I was in a stage of life where I'm not sure that they were like straight up romance novels, but I would read books that like would have a scene here and there. And like they would get me all tingly, and I'd be like, oh, now I could have sex, and like this is good.
Yeah.
And like it's taken a long time to like look back on that and realize how detrimental that was, because I wasn't allowing our relationship, my relationship with my husband, I wasn't allowing that relationship to inform our sex life. I was allowing this writer, this other relationship, to inform my own sex life.
Yeah.
And like the media that we consume is always teaching us something. I just learned this from, well, I mean, I guess I always kind of knew it, but like this was said on the podcast Every Knee Shall Bow. Fantastic podcast. But they were talking about media and how like we're like what Kathleen was saying before, like we as parents are often so concerned about what media like our children are consuming. We're worried about the books that they're reading. We're worried about the shows that they're watching. Like, for example, that stupid Spider-Man show that Disney had, like the
Spidey and his amazing spider friends.
I cannot stand that show.
Yeah.
Like, my children become so annoying after watching that show. The like evil villains are just dumb.
Yeah.
Which like minimizes evil, because like the evil spirits are not dumb, they are crafty, and like we cannot minimize evil like that. Like if my kids are going to be watching a show, there's a real villain who is real scary. Okay? Because there is actually a real villain who is really scary, right? Like
that's
Ariel,
a great point.
I mean, The Little Mermaid, excellent TV show. My kids were scared out of their socks from Ursula.
Oh, I love it.
And they should be.
I love it. I love that.
Okay, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent.
That's such a good point.
Like, we are so concerned about the shows that our kids are watching. We're so concerned about the books that our kids are watching. Are we policing ourselves in that same way?
That's
or are
true.
we telling ourselves like, oh, well, I'm mature enough to handle this?
Yeah. That's
no.
Yeah.
No, actually you're not. And like I've really only recently like learned this about media for myself. And so it's like if I start watching a show and there's a sex scene, I'm like, oh. And I have to turn it off. And sometimes it is a real sacrifice, because I heard people talking about Bridgerton for years. And how funny it was, and how like silly, and how fun, and the costumes were amazing. And I love costumes. Like I love shows that are well costumed. That's so fun. Right?
Oh yeah.
I watched people talk about Game of Thrones for years and how interesting it was, and all these different characters and their backstory and blah blah blah. And oh, I can't believe that person was killed, right? But also like, from what I understand of Game of Thrones, everybody eventually died. So like, why were you surprised? I don't know. Again, I never watched it, so I don't know.
I also heard that though. I heard that as well. Yeah. Also have no idea, but
right. Like this is a call to sacrificing the world. Like we as Christians have to recognize what is good for us and what is not good for us. And romance novels, these kinds of TV shows, we have to just cut that out of our lives. Because it not only is it altering our brain chemistry, but it is altering our soul.
yeah.
And it's, you know, and it's hurting our marriages.
You know, I'll give an example of a movie that seems totally not problematic, like would not be problematic, or you wouldn't consider inappropriate in any way, shape, or form, most way, shape, or form, that had this exact effect on me, which was P.S. I Love You.
I don't think I watched that one.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think it came out when I was in college. And I remember going to see it in the movie theaters. And it's just like, I think there's one, it's not like a true sex scene. It's just like, it alludes to the fact that they eventually have sex. But anyway, but for the most part, it's this woman receiving letters from her husband who passed away. And he like organized all of these letters. The romance involved, like that's it. It wasn't even the sex scene that got me, that like later on. It was the romance of these letters and this like incredible love that he was expressing for her, that I remember afterwards just being like, oh my gosh, I just want to like go make out with my boyfriend who is now my husband, right? But like, that's it. It was just like, because it was this desire for like such a deep romance, you know, for this really deep love that you're watching other people have. But it's not like I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go talk to Michael about how this made me feel and like what I want out of our love life and what like this desire I have for romance and being pursued. And, you know, that wasn't the result of me watching this movie. It was, I just want to go make out with my boyfriend now. You know what I mean? Because I just like feel...
and there's a huge difference there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like let's say you read a book that doesn't actually have a sex scene, but there's heavy romance in it. If it's also just taking you directly to sexual arousal, there's a problem there. And that's where we need to self-police ourselves.
We do need to self-police. And just like we just really need to focus on intention. Maybe you're not even aware that this is happening to you, with certain things, with certain shows, because you're just like, oh, there's no real sexual content. It's just like romantic and a lovely story. Like, that's fine. But it's just really being accountable of like, okay, well, why do I want to watch this movie? Like, what's drawing me to want to watch this right now? Is it that feeling that I know I will have, like, what's the feeling I know is going to come of this in the end? And, you know, and just be honest with yourself. Like, intention makes or breaks sin, right?
That's what we really need to do is, like, everyone listening here. And I mean, I'm just like, as we've been talking about this, I'm just thinking about any other media that I've been consuming. And I'm like, I just need to like make sure that I am being truly honest about like, what is my intention for watching the media that I'm watching? What is my intention for reading the books that I'm reading? Right. Mm-hmm. Like, and what am I getting out of it? What's the feeling I'm getting out of it? And we just have to cut out the things that are not serving us.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so let's talk about what do we do if we're like, we're listening to this and like, oh no.
I'm called out. Shoot.
I'm called out, right? First off is just, you got to get the books out of your house. You do. Even if you're halfway through the book, right? Like, and that's the hardest when you're halfway through a book and you're like, want to know what's at the end. This is your call to action here.
Yeah.
You know, any books that you have read in the past, you need to get them out of your house. And you need to consider what the right getting them out of your house is. Mm-hmm. Because, do we want to be donating those to a thrift store where somebody else has access to them? Do we?
Right.
That's something that, you and God need to have a conversation about. So you need to get the books out of your house. You need to, go through if you're anything like me and you get books from the library, like go through what you have reserved coming up, right? Get rid of those. And then just like do your research before you go to read a book. There's lots of like, I don't know if there's very many Catholic ones, but there's lots of like very fundamentalist Christian ones where you can read a really good like review of the book and you can read ones but like without spoilers in them of just like, what's the appropriate level of this book. But yeah, so we need to get the books out of our house. If you have any physical copies of like movies and stuff, you need to go through and really consider like which ones of these are actually worth keeping. And then as far as like, your subscription, we're not saying you need to like delete your subscriptions to Netflix and Disney Plus or whatever, right? There's also perfectly fine media on there. There is like VidAngel where you can watch shows like without the sex scenes. But again, like what we were talking about toward the end of like, you really got to watch like, even without a sex scene, what is it doing to you? Is it still creating that like sexual arousal for you? Is it like pushing you toward having sex, not actually pushing you toward like having a conversation with your husband about how you can make your love life better and your romance better? So, there's options like that. But then, I think, again, we just like research a show before you watch it.
Yeah.
Make sure that it is something that is appropriate. And then also just be really honest with yourself when you are watching something. Yeah. And we need to bring this to confession. We do.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
We do. Like,
which is sometimes awkward, but
yeah, it might be really embarrassing. It might be really awkward. But I mean, really, ultimately,
yeah,
it's not good for you. It's not good for your soul. This is why we have confession. Is to bring those things to God that are hurting our soul. We show contrition for them, right? And we get advice on how to avoid them. The priests often give fantastic advice.
If he doesn't give advice, you still get grace to help you.
Right. You still get God's grace, even if you don't get advice. The God's grace part is like 10 million times better.
More effective.
than any advice a priest is going to give you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing to mention, by the time this podcast episode releases, I will have a Getting in the Mood guide available, which is just going to be about like just practical ways of getting in the mood that are perfectly morally illicit. And there's going to be some ways of using your imagination. There's going to be some scripture reading in there that can help you get in the mood. I mean, ladies, just swap out your romance novel for Song of Songs.
There you go. Seriously, though. Goodness gracious. You want to talk spicy.
Right? There's going to be some prayer. And it's just like practical. There's going to be like practical activities that you can do to get yourself in the mood. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm working on it. Like as we are recording this is like several weeks before this podcast is going to release. So I'm like working on it right now. And it's like, it's a lot of fun. So I'm really excited about that. So there'll be a link in the show notes for that. But I mean, you don't have to buy a product, right, to get in the mood. But just like, don't be afraid to, like grab a journal and like have some prayer time and just be like, Lord, like, I didn't realize that what I was doing wasn't helping my marriage. It felt like it was fine. It felt like it was good. And just like ask God to reveal to you his love story, his romance toward you, and like help that inform what then you bring into your marriage. And into your sex life. Because all of these stories, every single romance story is like a poor imitation of Christ crucified on the cross.
Amen.
Truly. Because like Christ crucified on the cross is the ultimate love story. It is a man, ladies, listen, it is the perfect man giving everything of himself, giving up his body, soul, spirit, divinity, right?
Everything, all of it.
Everything, all of it. Giving it to you. Everything. Dying for you. Out of love. Literally dying of a broken heart. Isn't that what like some of the Eucharistic miracles talk about, of like, oh, like this is blood from someone who suffered and like basically died of a broken heart?
Yeah.
There's cool stuff.
I know. There's some really cool. They're real cool. They're kind of crazy.
Right. But like that's the real story. And like sex is a way of us imaging that story. Right. So we can allow that story to inform our sex life.
Yeah.
And that's a really good thing. Like, yes, let's let the ultimate love story inform our sex life. Let's not let some pale, crappy comparison that has a funny sibling dynamic and really cool costumes. Yes, I'm talking about Bridgerton. Let's not let that inform our beautiful, amazing, glorious, holy sex lives.
Amen.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.